Welcome to The Debate. What if I told you one of the most beloved children's books of the past decade essentially teaches toddlers that the best way to handle a playground bully is through, psychological warfare, grand theft equine, and trapping them in a dark cave?
Grand Theft Equine. Wow. I mean, it sounds like the plot of a gritty action thriller, right?
It really does.
But we are, in fact, talking about early childhood literature here. And usually we expect these early moral training wheels to be, well, perfectly symmetrical for developing minds. You behave well, you get rewarded, you misbehave, and you face a proportionate, logical consequence.
Exactly. But then you open a piece of literature like The Highway Rat by Julia Donaldson, and suddenly those simple developmental milestones become this highly complex, nuanced narrative.
Very complex.
Yeah. So today we are examining the educational value and moral framework of this children's story, specifically from an early childhood perspective. We're going to look closely at how it presents the concepts of right and wrong, the behavioral consequences of bullying, and really dive deep into analyzing the underlying motivations behind the rat's constant stealing of food.
Right, because that motivation is key. The central question is really, does this narrative provide young children with a constructive, coherent lesson?
And I argue that it absolutely does. The story offers a clear, highly effective moral framework where unchecked greed is appropriately condemned and, frankly, community restitution is celebrated.
Well, and I argue that the story's educational value is severely compromised by confusing moral ambiguities. Specifically, its reliance on retaliatory deception and what amounts to a highly superficial, fear-based resolution to the antagonist's behavioral issues.
Okay, well, let's lay out our core frameworks first. I view this text as a really powerful, almost classical pedagogical tool for young children. And that's precisely because it establishes absolute clarity regarding right and wrong from the very first syllable.
Right. It doesn't really pull its punches.
No, it doesn't. The narrative doesn't mince words. It explicitly defines the highway rat as a baddie and a beast. When you are reading to a 3 or 4-year-old, this explicit categorization is a vital anchor.
I see that, but...
And furthermore, his motivation serves as a brilliantly clear allegory for gluttony and selfishness. He steals everything on the highway, resulting in him growing horribly fat, while the other creatures literally starve.
Yeah, the visual asymmetry is definitely there.
Right. So there is a direct, observable, physical cause and effect relationship between his bullying and his eventual downfall. It provides a highly concrete lesson on the consequences of unchecked greed that a toddler can easily map onto their own world.
I hear the appeal of that classical fable structure, I do. But from an early childhood perspective, the behavioral modeling presented here is just deeply contradictory.
Contradictory how?
Well, if we're evaluating this as a tool for teaching right and wrong, we have to look at the actual mechanics of how the conflict is resolved. The rat's motivations, as I see them, are much more about irrational dominance than simple greed, which instantly complicates the lesson. But my primary concern rests heavily on the resolution. The so-called heroic duck achieves justice through lying. She invents a sister with goodies to bait a trap.
It's a clever trick, though.
A clever trick, sure, but she engages in manipulation, utilizing an echo cave to deceive the rat. And ultimately, she commits theft by taking the rat's horse. I contend that this teaches young children a highly problematic, two wrongs make a right approach to conflict resolution.
You really think kids see it that literally?
I do. We are effectively telling toddlers that deceit and theft are acceptable, provided you're using them against someone we have preemptively labeled a baddie.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning because, frankly, it applies a rigid adult legalism to a fable framework that children actually navigate quite intuitively.
Adult legalism?
Yes, but let's start with the rat's motivation, because understanding why he steals food is central to how a child interprets the wrongness of the act. I focus on the physical, tangible evidence presented in the text.
Okay.
He is constantly demanding pastries and puddings and chocolate and cake. For a young mind still grasping theory of mind, which, just to unpack that briefly, is a child's emerging ability to realize that other people have desires and motivations completely separate from their own. Abstract concepts like resource hoarding are meaningless.
True.
But a desire for endless sweets? That is a tangible, universally understood toddler drive. By anchoring the rat's villainy in his obsession with treats, the narrative effectively translates abstract immorality into food-based terms a young child can actually grasp.
See, I come at it from a different way. Because if we look closely at the text, the hunger for sweets argument falls apart entirely.
Does it?
It absolutely does. Yes, he asks for cakes and chocolates, but look at the inventory of what he actually takes. He steals a rabbit's clover, explicitly noting that it is tasteless and dull as can be.
Well, he's just taking everything.
Right, but he steals a squirrel's sack of nuts, snarling that they are probably rotten. He intercepts ants to steal a single green leaf that he declares is nasty and bitter. He even steals his own horse's hay.
I mean, that's just funny.
It's funny, but if the motivation were simple gluttony or a toddler-relatable desire for sweets, he would reject these items. Instead, his motivation is pathological dominance.
You don't think a child can grasp that kind of dominance?
I think it complicates the moral instruction immensely. Think of it this way. It's not a starving man stealing bread. It's a billionaire buying a rival company just to shut it down.
Oh, come on, a billionaire.
Hear me out. It's purely about monopolizing power. He says, repeatedly, this belongs to me, simply because he has the power to take it. He is asserting control.
Okay.
I just question whether this highly nuanced, almost sociopathic depiction of power-based bullying is effectively resolved for a young child's understanding. It moves far beyond he took my toy because he wanted to play with it into he took my toy just so I couldn't have it.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it completely differently. You're actually identifying the exact mechanism that makes the lesson so effective for a toddler.
How so?
The repetition of the rat demanding and taking things he openly admits he hates perfectly encapsulates the sheer irrationality of bullying. When a preschooler watches a peer grab a broken green crayon they weren't even using just to assert dominance, that feels incredibly confusing to them.
Yeah, playground dynamics can be tough.
Exactly. And the rat mirrors that exact behavior. By having the rat steal flies from a spider and milk from a cat, the story exaggerates the behavior to the point of ridiculousness. The child listener recognizes that the rat's actions make absolutely no logical sense.
Well, they see he's being mean. Sure.
Right, and he is growing fat while they grow thinner and thinner, showing the visual asymmetry of his hoarding. It provides a vocabulary for children to recognize that sometimes bullies act out of a desire for control, not out of a genuine need for the object.
Okay, but if we establish that he is this unstoppable, irrational playground bully, the natural question a toddler has is, how do I stop him? And the book's answer to that is the duck.
The hero of the story.
Let's look at what she actually does. When she waddles down the road, the rat escalates his threats. He says, I fancy a duck for tea. He is literally threatening to eat her.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. Now, how does our protagonist model conflict resolution for our impressionable audience? She doesn't seek help from a trusted adult figure. She doesn't establish a firm boundary. Instead, the duck immediately spins a complex lie. Hang on, I have a sister with goodies you might prefer. In her deep, dark cave. She lures him into a hazardous environment, uses the natural acoustics of the cave to manipulate his greed, and the moment he steps off his horse, she steals it and gallops away.
It's survival.
In an early childhood setting where educators spend their days reinforcing, use your words, tell the truth, and don't take things that don't belong to you, the duck strategy is an absolute nightmare of contradictory modeling.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a totally different perspective on the duck's actions. What you're describing as contradictory modeling is actually a time-honored brains over brawn survival narrative.
Brains over brawn, sure, but at what moral cost?
We have to remember the stakes here. You just said it yourself. The rat isn't just taking a toy. He has stripped the entire community of their sustenance, and he has just threatened the duck's life.
Right.
Expecting the duck to use her words or establish a boundary with an irrational, overpowering aggressor who lacks empathy is actually a much more dangerous lesson to teach a child. The story teaches that when you are outmatched physically, you can and should use your intellect.
By lying and stealing.
But wait, the most crucial detail, the piece that entirely absolves a duck of the two wrongs make a right charge, is the aftermath.
You mean the feast at the end?
Exactly. The duck isn't stealing the horse to start her own private equestrian center.
Obviously not.
She gallops down the highway, back to her hungry friends. Then they share out the food from the saddlebags. They build a bonfire, they have music and song, and they feast all night long.
I admit, it's a very joyous scene.
It is. The duck acts as an agent of restorative justice. She reclaims the stolen resources of the community and redistributes them so they can live in freedom, safe from the highway rat. This isn't grand theft, it's restitution. It models for children that true heroism involves utilizing your wits to protect your community and ensuring that resources are shared equitably among those who have been wronged. It perfectly counterbalances the rat's selfish hoarding.
That is a compelling argument regarding community restitution, I'll give you that. But have you considered the cognitive dissonance it creates for a 4-year-old?
In what way?
Children at that developmental stage are incredibly literal. They operate on what developmental psychologists call concrete operational rules, meaning if a rule is no hitting, it means no hitting ever.
Usually, yes.
There is no gray area for self-defense or nuance. If taking something without asking is bad, it is universally bad. The nuance of it's okay to trick and steal from the bad guy because he stole from us first and we're going to share it requires a level of moral relativism that toddlers simply do not possess yet.
I don't know about that.
They see the duck lying and they see the duck taking a horse that isn't hers. It's very literal for them.
You really don't think they understand fairness?
They understand fairness, but they don't understand the suspension of rules. And the echo cave manipulation, it's psychological warfare. The rat hears chocolates, chocolates, chocolates echoing back.
Which is his own greed reflecting back at him?
Yes, he is a victim of his own unchecked impulses, but he is also being actively gaslit by the protagonist. We have to be very careful about celebrating a protagonist who weaponizes the antagonist's psychological weaknesses as a behavioral model.
I think you are vastly underestimating the moral sophistication of young children, honestly. When a child sees the rat taking the ant's single leaf, their sense of justice is immediately activated.
Right.
They recognize that the rat has broken the social contract first. When the duck takes the horse, children understand instinctively that the normal rules of engagement have been suspended by the rat's own aggression.
I'm not so sure.
But to fully evaluate this, we really have to look at the final consequence. How does the book handle the antagonist once he's defeated? Because I believe this is where the story truly distinguishes itself as a positive educational tool. We have to look at the rat's ultimate fate and his rehabilitation.
Yes, let's look at that fate, because this is where I have my strongest reservations.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. The rat wanders lost in the dark cave until he eventually finds his way out on the other side of the hill. He emerges a thinner and grayer and meeker rat. And his ultimate consequence? He lands a job sweeping a cake shop floor.
Which is a great outcome.
Now, I have to question the educational value of this mechanism. We have established that the rat is a thief, pathologically obsessed with sweets, right?
Correct.
So the narrative punishes him by placing him inside a bakery, completely surrounded by the very items he spent the entire book terrorizing people to acquire, but restricting him to only sweeping the floor.
It's poetry.
It's like the myth of Tantalus standing in a pool of water he can never drink. It is punitive irony. There is no moment where the rat realizes why his actions hurt the rabbit or the ants.
Well,
There is no apology modeled. He just gets trapped in a cave, gets terrified, and is forced into menial labor. How does this teach a child to genuinely resolve conflict and reform bad behavior?
I see the irony, certainly, but I view it as an immensely positive and constructive educational outcome. Let's look at the actual mechanism of what is happening in that bakery.
Okay.
Typically, in classic fables, the villain is thrown into a boiling pot of water, or falls off a cliff, or is chased out of the forest forever. Those are purely punitive, exclusionary resolutions.
That's true. The stakes in old fables are usually lethal.
Exactly. The highway rat does something remarkable for a children's story. It focuses on societal integration. By having him sweep the floor, the book is showing children the mechanism of earning.
Earning? Really?
Yes, earning. He is replacing the cheap dopamine hit of stealing with the grounded reality of contributing. That's exactly how you integrate an antisocial child back into a classroom dynamic. You give them a job. You give them a way to participate constructively.
Sweeping a floor.
He robs on the road no more. That is the behavioral correction right there. Sweeping the floor represents humility. He isn't the grand rat of the highway, demanding tribute anymore. He is earning a living through service. And the fact that it's in a cake shop shows that he can now exist in the presence of the things he desires without resorting to violence to get them. He has learned self-control.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The text explicitly tells us his internal state. He works there because he's a thinner and grayer and meeker rat.
Right.
He hasn't learned self-control through some noble realization of honest labor. His spirit has been broken by the sensory deprivation of the cave. He is meek because he was traumatized.
That's a very dark reading.
From a pedagogical standpoint, we want to teach children that we correct our behavior because we develop empathy for how our actions affect others. We want the child who snatches a toy to understand that it made their friend sad.
Sure, empathy is important.
The rat never considers the ants or the squirrel or the rabbit. If a toddler's takeaway is, don't be a bully because someone smarter will trick you into a dark cave and take your things until you turn gray, we haven't taught morality. We've taught them to fear someone with better strategic deception skills.
But again, you are isolating the rat's punishment from the broader community outcome. Morality in this story isn't solely about the internal emotional state of the antagonist. It's about the restoration of the community's safety and joy.
The bonfire at the end.
Exactly. The bright flames of the bonfire, the loud music, the moonlight dancing. The text emphasizes that now they could live in freedom. For a toddler, understanding that bad behavior disrupts community joy and that stopping the bad behavior restores that joy is a deeply foundational lesson.
I see the value in that, but
The rat's specific emotional realization is less important than the tangible outcome. The stealing is stopped, the food is shared equitably, and the community is safe. The visual of him sweeping the floor is concrete evidence that the threat is neutralized and order is restored.
which brings us right back to the core tension. Is order restored because the moral arc bends towards justice, or is order restored because the duck was a better manipulator?
Well,
Because the narrative spends so much time establishing the rat's absolute, unyielding dominance, rejecting a nasty and bitter leaf while still hoarding it, it builds this incredibly sophisticated portrait of a sociopathic resource hoarder.
it does build a great villain.
And to unravel all of that psychological complexity with a cheap echo trick feels like it shortchanges the very depth it established. It leaves the young reader with a highly ambiguous toolkit for dealing with conflict. If they encounter a playground bully demanding their snacks, they might not realize that spinning a lie about a secret stash of chocolates isn't actually the best real-world strategy.
I hear you, but I maintain that children are highly capable of differentiating between a fantastical survival strategy and literal playground instructions. They understand the genre of the fable
Hopefully.
and the underlying truth of that fable, that greed is isolating, that bullying is inherently irrational, and that communities thrive when resources are shared rather than hoarded. I mean, that shines through brilliantly.
Well, we can certainly agree that the story provides an incredible canvas for discussion. It completely bypasses the simple sharing as caring tropes we usually see, presenting instead a surprisingly complex web of power dynamics, resource hoarding, and survival tactics.
Absolutely.
There is just a lot to unpack there for an adult reading to a child, especially when we start questioning the true motivation behind a bully's actions.
Exactly. It forces us to look closely at the subtle behavioral frameworks we present to young minds. So, to summarize our positions, I believe that the undeniable consequences for the rat's bullying combined with the duck's clever, restorative redistribution of the food to the community, makes the highway rat an incredibly strong, effective educational tool for toddlers.
And I maintain that the reliance on deceit, manipulation, and theft to solve the problem, coupled with an ironic, trauma-based rehabilitation for the rat, creates moral ambiguities that require very careful adult mediation when presented to a developing mind.
Both perspectives highlight just how much depth can be found in a story that, on the surface, is just about a rat on a horse.
A very mean rat.
A very mean rat. But examining the nuances of early childhood material yields profound insights into how we conceptualize justice, fairness, and rehabilitation. We leave it to you, the listener, to decide how you evaluate the story's ultimate educational worth for the young minds in your life.
It's definitely worth a second read.
It is. Because, as we've seen today, the building blocks of early morality might not always stack perfectly, but sometimes they create a structure far more fascinating than we ever anticipated.